You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Call. I got Brad Hunt here behind the camera, and today we're going to talk about setting up a Silex in steep country in a deer bed. We're going to walk you through it. A lot of you guys might benefit from this discussion and how we do it. So we're going to walk through it. We've got our Silex with us, trekking poles to set it up. And this is the Seek Outside Silex. We like, it's typically the sill nylon because we can run a stove jack in there and run a wood stove. But this early season, we might opt for, as we mentioned in our tent podcast not too long ago, shelter podcast. If you haven't seen that, check that one out. We will run the Cuban fiber version for just weight purposes if we don't need a stove. But typically, we almost always bring a stove. I'd say on this early in the season, because it's still August, we probably wouldn't. And that's where the Cuban fiber will come in handy. We're going to set up the Dyneema Silex, which is what we've got with us today. It is August, so that's the perfect shelter up in here. But we're going to excavate these beds. We're going to talk about the deer beds here and just walk you through it. But before we do, big, huge giveaway going on right now at Go Hunt. If you are in need of some last minute gear, go to Go Hunt Gear Shop and use the code GRITTY over there, and you will get a discount, 10% off on everything. You also will get entered to win a huge prize package that we're giving away in 2 weeks. It has a bow, it has arrows, PSE bow, arrows. We've got a $500 gift card. We've got goat knives. We've got a Eberly stock bino harness. A lot of cool stuff in the giveaway. Got to thank all our partners for that. So get entered to win. Just go over there, buy your stuff, buy your gear at Go Hunt. Plus, it's a hunting company full of hunters. We got our buddy Brady Miller over there, works at Go Hunt. They put a lot of great articles out, and they have their new Go Hunt maps. And if you get their Go Hunt maps, which right now it's $30 for all 50 states, you can download everything if you use the code GRITTY. It's $30. Technically, it's $50, but you get a $20 store credit in the gear shop immediately upon purchase when you use the code GRITTY. So it's really going to cost you $30, and it's well worth it. It's an excellent map system. Everybody should have it on their phones. We rely on it a lot. It's got better satellite imagery than just about every competitor. It's got other features like 3D pan and tilt that are excellent. Yeah, you just got to check it out. For $30, you can't go wrong. And you can transfer all the data you have from your existing map system over there in about 10 minutes, 5 minutes. It's really easy. Everybody needs more than one map system on their phone too. So check that out. All right, Brad, we're going to get into setting this thing up right now. And let's start with why we chose this spot. So we got this steep hillside behind us. And let's say we're in some steep country, and this is where we want to be because we want to be glassing this slope or this over here. There is no flat spot to set up. Well, this is where a Silex shines, or a similar small shelter system, because you can use a deer bed you can literally pitch your shelter in a deer bed. So we've got 2 deer beds here. We would typically, a lot of deer will bed on the upside or the bottom side of a tree on a steep slope. That's what we have here. So if you find a couple of trees, it's likely that there is a deer bed there. If you're in a big, wide open, steep country, this is what we've got. So let's get to excavating this and preparing the site for setting up a tent, a shelter. So we've got this tree here. Normally we use a silky saw, a silky pocket boy saw for chopping wood, cutting things. And I can't see a situation where we wouldn't bring it. But today we brought this Winkler hatchet, tomahawk, axe. This is the Hunter axe. It's pretty cool. We're going to mess around with it. I've been a huge fan of Jack Carr. And, the Navy SEALs use a Winkler tomahawk. And the sheath is pretty cool, the way that it goes in right here. It goes right into sheath here, and it's got a little rubber band here that comes around, a little bungee, and all you do is just pull that and it comes right out. So we're going to use this because we don't have our saw, plus I want to test it and see maybe for excavating, digging out the bed. I'm curious how this will work. It definitely has a nice hammer in for hammering stakes in. We'll mess around with it and we'll chop this up and we'll see how well it does. But let's get to excavating. Well, the axe is kind of cool. It's tiny. It's tiny. And although I used it to clear the area around this tree, and we'll try to use it to scratch out a little bit level spot here. Just kind of run it through the paces to see how it does. The saw is by far more efficient as far as cutting away branches. It would make short work out of this, whereas this axe definitely isn't quite there. So what I'm going to do here is what we would typically do is we would excavate a little more of a flat spot for us to pitch our to lay our air pads and whatnot down. And when we don't have like a hatchet like this, a little camp axe, then I might just use we'll use a rock and do the same exact thing I'm doing here, like as a pick. Winkler has a stealth axe that has more of a pick than a hammer, so it's kind of interesting just to compare, mess around with it. But we're kind of building ourselves like a little spot where we would like to lay down. So what I might do is excavate my spot. We're not actually going to camp here, so I'm not going to spend too much time going into that. But here's my ground cloth. Okay. This is just a Tyvek ground cloth. A lot of times before I throw up my shelter, I'll throw my ground cloth down and go, is this going to work? Okay. Is this going to be comfortable? The answer is not quite. It's a little too sloped still. If I was a deer, maybe. And I wouldn't really know that, right? You can guess, but by laying down on it, I could definitely realize that this is not deep enough, okay? This side of the bed is too slanted. So I'm gonna get in here and move all this over this earth and try to get this thing so I'm not angled, so I feel like I'm gonna roll into this tree next to me. Like I said, we would either grab a stick and sharpen it and build something to move this earth with, typically, or we grab. Now a lot of people will be like, oh, just sleep on the slant or whatever. And it's like, no. We have found like good night's rest is important. You can get, just with a little bit of effort, you can get a real comfortable flat spot. Flat spots matter. It's worth, generally it's worth the extra effort. That's pretty good. Like I said, I might carve a little more out if I was actually going to sleep here for the night and stay. But for demonstration purposes, you get the idea. So we kicked out a little deer bed. Assuming there's no other flat spot where we can set up, boom, we found a deer bed. Now we're going to throw up our Silex shelter right here and show you how it's done. Brad mentioned something that he's got a point. Like sometimes the hillside is really, the deer bed is hard rock. In that case, what we'll do, sometimes we'll lay some sticks and logs on the downhill side and we'll backfill it with dirt. And instead of digging into the earth, we'll sort of build a mound on the downhill side to get you more level. Throw the tarp on it, lay on it, and go, okay, that feels good. And set it up that way. So you have various options. Okay, let's set this sucker up. So I'm hammering this down and I'm getting this stake set because this isn't gonna move. I know that's as far as I can get this tent over. And I know that this is where I gotta put the stake. And this deer bed is up tight and I don't really want to excavate over any more than I have to. So got that one nailed down. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get the sides ready. The way this works is the doors go this way and the poles go this way, up and down. So we're getting the sides pitched. We already have that staked in. Now we're doing the sides here. And I'm gonna try to line it up with the middle of the bed where I'm sleeping. This point, kind of the center of the sleeping area. Now, when I pull this out like this and I stretch it, there's a little loop right here on the Seek Outside shelter. Typically, if I mark that loop right here, this is the spot underneath that loop is where I actually want to drive in this stake. Okay, so here we go. You don't have a hammer, you can use a rock. Okay, so again, got that here, and I might go ahead and throw again, we rock these things out most of the time. We'll find a boulder and we'll set our big rock right there as we pitch it. But we're not actually camping here, so I'm not gonna go find a rock. Got that one staked in. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and put my pole in here. Okay, I'm gonna fully extend. I like to fully extend the aluminum piece and then shorten the upper half. Climb inside. So if you look at this right here, there's like a little Velcro piece that attaches to your trekker like this. You can spin it up inside there, and that helps hold the top of the pole in place. And then I'll try to line that up. Probably right about there, I think. All right, as you can see, this is an extreme slope. I mean, super sloped. We have a nice flat deer bed inside the shelter. If we really wanted to tack her down all the way, I'd run out the guy lines on each side, pretty far out. If you notice, okay, the shelter is on a slant on the hill sideways, okay? So the pole down here, we're tied up against this tree. We knew we would be, so we had to adjust accordingly. We don't get to kick the bottom door out as tight as we normally would. Again, we're kind of making do with the flat spot we were working with and this extreme slope. We're okay with that, the way it's set up right now. We've got this pole, this trekker pole in there, and it's lower, much lower than this trekking pole, so the roof is angled about the same slope as the hillside, which then allows us to put the whole shelter kind of flat and suck it to the hillside. We'll climb inside and you'll see what it feels like in there in just a minute. But basically what we did was we put our stake in at the base of the tree because we knew that wasn't going to change. We threw in our trekking pole at a certain height, and then what we did was we adjusted the string right here at the door. We have a zipperless door here. We adjusted this to tighten up the distance for the length of that guy line, that line from the top of that trekker down, get a little tautness in there. And then we staked the two sides, which you saw us do on the sides, about right here. And then we stuck in the trekker on the end. That was our last. We staked the door down on this end, and then we lengthened or shorten the cord accordingly, so we had a good slope. We tried to match the angle of the roof with the angle of the hill, roughly, and we were able to stake the rest of it down on the corners here. We'll climb inside and see what it's like, but this is an extremely lousy spot to put a shelter, but what we're trying to do is show that you can do it on these steep hillsides and create a pretty comfortable little spot with this shelter. It's not tied down like super taut in all the places, but you're out of the wind with this big tree blocking your wind, and we're kind of rolled over into a little cut on this side. So it actually works out well for this little spot. One of the reasons why we would select this as an actual camping spot. Often deer beds are a good indication that you're in a good spot. If a deer wants to spend the night there, it's probably a good bet that the wind and all the factors that go into making it a good shelter for the deer make it also a good shelter for you. One of the other things to note is right here, this is our door. This uphill side is our door, and we'll often pull these stakes up and we won't run them. Depends on the wind and all the factors there, but because it's a zipperless door design, we typically leave this stake undone and the other stake undone, because it allows us to have a much bigger egress getting into the shelter. You can see the shelter is down over here. Again, we don't have the stake on that front end and this corner here, these corners right here. You could, but you don't need them. Most of the time we don't need them on the egress side, on the side we're gonna get in and out of the shelter. The zipperless door goes up like so, and now you can see we have this space in here. Again, if this were staked down tight right here, it would make it a little harder to get in and out of the door. And so often, like I said, we just don't do those unless it's one of those kind of windy, stormy days where we'd want to do that. Okay, coming into the shelter here, I'm gonna kick these rocks off here and set up my tarp again. Stack of rock here. Okay, here's my tarp, my Tyvek, which, I mean, for bang for the buck, I think it's, I don't know, 20 bucks or so on Amazon for a piece of Tyvek, and then we run it through the washing machine and get it soft. Okay, so here we are in the shelter. I got plenty of head clearance. You can see out here, laying down, I got a comfortable space. If I wanted to, you know, technically now that I'm in here, I could actually add a little tightness to some of this by raising my stakes if I need to. Get a little more tight in here, but it feels pretty good. And it's even possible, Brad, to pull this string a little tighter on the top. And now she's real tight across the top. Now it's real tight. So Brad just added a little tightness to the door and just really stiffened it up through the ridge top. So it's actually quite roomy for just one guy. I can stack my stuff right down here. There's a bit of a hole here because we got our bed and it drops off, but it's kind of nice. I've sat in this kind of stuff a lot, and you almost have a bench where you can just kind of sit down. So if Brad, you want to come on inside and join me. Okay, Brad and I are both in here. He's inside with the camera. You know, I'm sitting on my deal here, legs hanging off. Got plenty of room in here. It's a nice little shelter for one person in a storm. I've ridden this out in heavy snowstorms, heavy rainstorms, wind, tucked up just like this on a steep hillside under a tree. And it works pretty great. I've run a stove on this end, and if I were to run a stove in this shelter, I would have picked a different bed because I don't want the stove way down in a hole, and I don't want air coming up down here. Brad, if you want to show people, yep. This end, you can't do much about it. There's a 2-foot hole from where the bed is and the deer bed is and where it drops against the tree. So normally it wouldn't be like that. It would be flat to the tree. A lot of times it is, but this is a really steep hill. So this is what we've got to work with. So I'm going to close this, and then you can see how that works. So I would have, you know, more gear over here. This is the stake I'm talking about. I would stake this down and the opposite side if it was a real stormy, windy situation. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it just like that so that the egress is bigger and I can open it up, let more air in. The shelter, again, laying down here. Got all the comfort in the world here. Sit up, got my gear down here, the big vestibule area right here on a severe slope. Deer bed is flat. It's a pretty good little shelter setup for a single guy. You could technically run the stove with the stove jack right here. You could put a little thing here, and we recommend a medium. We don't like the cub. Generally, it's too small to keep everything warm. This tent on slopes like this, where you got this severe slope, it's really difficult when you're like this. If you do put the stove on the high side, it's going to be a little bit harder to get in and out of the shelter because your stovepipe comes out right here. But you could do it, especially if you don't stake these down. And in this situation, if I really wanted a stove and this was my spot, that's how I would do it. I wouldn't run the stove on the side with the tree because it's pretty much right up against the tree. There is no vestibule going on right now. It's straight down. With a medium stove right here in this small space, even though I got quite a bit of airflow coming in from down here, the stove is so warm and so big for this space, you could overpower that cool air coming in and keep a lot of heat trapped right here. Plus, you're elevated quite a bit higher than down here. The stove isn't far from you as well, so it would work. And then if you wanted a little more headroom, I mean, right now I can just move over here toward the pole and I got all the headroom I want. Toward the center, you can see I got plenty of room. The further out I get, the less, but I have plenty of room. But if I wanted to, I could loosen up the guy lines on either end of the trekking poles, raise the trekking poles up and then cinch them back down again. The only downside is I may not be able to suck the rest of the shelter as tight to the ground as I have it right now. So anyway, it takes a little practice, you know, setting up on deer beds on steep slopes like this, putting up little shelter, single person shelter like this. But we've ridden this out in Alaska, in nasty mountains, elk hunting, deer hunting. It's a pretty, I mean, the sil nylon version of this with a medium U-turn stove weighs the same as a Cuban fiber Cimarron, roughly, with a stove. But we'd run a large in the Cuban fiber Cimarron, not a medium, if we can, or even an SXL or something. So it's pretty nice. And I think the sil nylon version of this is around $250 with a stove jack, plus your stove, another 200 or something like that, 300.
I don't know.
So I don't know, for $450 or so, you could have a full-blown, heated, pitch anywhere, comfortable shelter that's hyper lightweight for being a stove and a shelter. So those are just some tips, you know. Brad, you got anything you want to add? Anything you can think of here?
No, you could, worst case, you could, on the outside there are 2 D-loops. You could tie to your trees or tie up above to kind of
add a little more stability.
There's to raise it.
There's guy outs throughout the shelter, absolutely, where you could get a little more out of it than we have currently. So if you want to step back and take a look at it, you know, this is not an ideal camping spot, but it is a spot that can do the job. You know, we just cleared out a few of those branches, but again, I mean, that's a pretty spacious, comfortable shelter on a very difficult to pitch area. That's the advantage of having this form of shelter. And again, we just tightened it here. The guidelines here for adjusting for the height of the trekkers depending on the terrain we're dealing with. And normally what we would do is we would go around this thing and rock it out. We put heavy boulder here, here on each of these stakes. Biggest rocks we could find to try to accommodate for the shelter. And then if we were really worried about it, we'd use all the stakeouts and the guidelines. And like Brad said, there's even D-loops on the peaks here where you could tie to the tree, give it just all the different levels of stability if you had to ride a real heavy storm out. One more thing you should look at is right here, Brad, how severe we were with the downhill side of the shelter setup, given the tree is in the way, how we were able to shorten the pole, tighten the guy line, and although it's loose, it's plenty taut on the rest of the tent to keep it intact, to keep it doing the job we need it to do. The other option would have been to come down here and set up a teepee or set up the shelter on this bed, which this spot would have actually given us far more to work with. We probably in a real situation would have set up here because clear out some of these branches, kick this out, get a nice huge level spot, and then set up, and we wouldn't have that steep hole that we were dealing with. We'd still have wind, shelter, and so forth, some shade, but we could also set up on the downhill side in this deer bed and accomplish the same thing, maybe even get it to lay down more tight than we have it up there. But anyway, right now we're doing a huge giveaway with Go Hunt, and Go Hunt carries Seek Outside. They have these in stock. I believe they have various Seek Outside shelters that they sell through their gear shop, their Go Hunt gear shop. If you use the code GRIDDY, you get 10% off on those shelters. And you also get entered to win a huge prize package, which we're doing with Go Hunt over the next 2 weeks. If you get their digital maps, you'll get a $20 credit for the store. You also get 50 entries, or 25 entries actually, to win the prize. If you get a Go Hunt Insider membership, you'll get 50 entries to win the prize. Every $25 you spend at the store gets you an entry. So pretty cool deal we have going on. Win that PSE bow, the arrows, knives, Eberly stock, vinyl harness, lots of options there for you. And then right now we have a huge giveaway going on with Stealthy Hunter. He's doing a massive giveaway, Ryan, right now. If you use the code GRIDDY, you're entered to win a huge giveaway. And that giveaway includes...
You get a PSE bow.
PSE bow.
XF33,
yep.
Arrows, broadheads.
Stone Glacier backpack.
A Western Hunting Summit pass.
Yep, that's right.
$300 to the...
Good thing I have Brad.
Stealthy
to the
Hunter shop.
Stealthy Hunter shop. So anyway, big giveaway there. Big shout out to Ryan and Hillary for putting that on with us. Use the code GRIDDY across the board at Go Hunt or Stealthy. You're going to be entered to win a couple of cool prize packages. Plus, you get discounts on everything, so everybody wins. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for liking the show. Subscribe if you haven't already to our YouTube channel. And leave us a comment. We really appreciate those. And stay gritty.